It's December of 1851 in France, and Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte has dissolved the Second Republic. A brutal crackdown on any opposition to Napoleon's power ensues. The opening scene of our film portrays a herd of horses charging through a field. We only see their hooves, and not the riders. The horses arrive in a quaint village, and now we see that they are being ridden by soldiers. The inhabitants of the village are frightened by their arrival. The soldiers go from door to door, rounding up all the men, and proceed to march them out of the village. Any who resist are dealt with violently. One of the village men shouts, "Long live the Republic! Death to Louis Napoleon!" and is immediately shot dead. That night, the women of the village discuss how to divide their remaining weaponry. The soldiers confiscated most of their weapons, but they have 4 guns left. The women also wonder what will become of their men, and how long they will be held by Napoleon's army for. One of the women says,
"Ça durera pas. Ce qu'ils veulent, c'est arrêter les révoltes."
The film's protagonist, Violette, takes some soup and bread to Rose, who is wrapped up in bed mourning the loss of her murdered husband. Rose refuses to eat. Next, we see Violette with the village healer. The healer is hovering her hands over Violette's body, particularly her womb. The healer asks Violette how long she has been experiencing her condition, and Violette tells her that it has been 5 months. We don't know what this initial question is in reference to until the healer asks if Violette has ever been involved with a man. Violette insists that she has not, and tells the healer that she has felt dead inside ever since the men were taken from the village. She's even stopped dreaming. The healer asks Violette what she used to dream about, and she recounts her dream of a bird of prey. The healer encourages Violette to welcome this bird into her dreams every night before she goes to sleep. Violette asks if dreams can heal, and the healer says that sometimes they can, and that she should return in a month's time if her condition does not change. Next, we see Violette and the other women working the fields before a gunshot in the distance startles them. They pause momentarily before continuing with their work. When one of the women asks if anyone has seen Rose, Violette goes running off in search of her, saying that today would have been Rose's wedding anniversary. Violette finds Rose sobbing in a field where she has set her wedding dress ablaze. While the women are busy washing clothes, Violette says that they cannot go on like this. They must find out what has happened to their men. Violette is willing to leave the village to find answers, but one of the older women forbids her, and warns her that leaving the village could put her at the mercy of the constable or priest, who are said to force themselves upon women. Despite the elder woman's warning, Violette leaves the village early one morning in search of answers. Behind the cover of the forest's foliage, she sees some soldiers guarding a bridge, and runs back to the village out of fear of being discovered. Violette knocks on Mrs. Maillot's door. When she doesn't answer, she walks around the house to find her body hanging in the alleyway. We see 3 women standing in the field, tasting the crop, which they deem to be ripe for harvest. Immediately after this scene, we jump to nighttime, where Violette wakes up abruptly to find that she is bleeding from her intimate region. The film then cuts back to the field where the village women are harvesting the crop. The women are feeling the absence of their men deeply, some more than others, as we see one of the villagers in a deranged state ringing the church bells repeatedly late one night, crying out that her son and all the other men are dead. The next day, Violette is sitting in the field with Rose, Josephine, and some of the other young women. They discuss their predicament and the concerns of their isolation. What if their men never return? And if they do, what state would they be in? The women discuss what might happen if a single man were to stumble across their remote little village. They agree that they would all have to share him to ensure that life in the village continues. The man would have to agree that if he wants one of the women, he would have to take them all. Meanwhile, the older women discuss their concerns for the future of their daughters. Without any men and the hope of starting families, they may be inclined to leave. Winter has arrived, and the cobbled streets of the village are decorated with snow. Violette's little brother is helping her in one of the sheep barns when he asks why their father was taken away. The boy suspects that it may have something to do with their father's secret meetings in the valley. This indicates that the men in the village may have been part of the resistance to Louis Napoleon's rule. Later, we see Rose and Violette weaving clothing together. They share their intimate thoughts about what kind of man they imagine coming to the village. Violette asks Rose what it feels like to sleep with a man for the first time, and Rose tells her it is like nothing she's ever felt before, both icy and hot at the same time. The rains have started to fall, and Violette warns the others that the barn which stores all of their grain has sprung a leak. The women rush to the barn, and together they hold up a long ladder in the pouring rain so that one of the women can climb onto the roof and mend the leak. Violette is commended for her efforts, and thankfully, most of the grain has been saved. The women are picking apples in the orchard when they spot the silhouette of a man in the tree line. One of the older women comments that he is not one of theirs. Seeing the women in the orchard, the man stops to greet them. He introduces himself to Violette and tells her that he is a blacksmith and asks if he may have accommodation for the night. The women approve his request. Violette takes the man to the house that will be his for the night, and while she is preparing the room, he offers to reshoe their horses and donkeys in return for the lodging. The conversation leads the man to discover that all the men were arrested after the coup, and none of them have returned yet. The man asks if Violette has been back to the valley since the arrests, and informs her that Napoleon was named emperor 3 months ago, and that this time, the Republic is over for good. He also tells Violette that the rumors are that the prisoners have either been killed or deported. Violette reports back to the other women. She tells them that she cannot discern if the stranger is for or against Louis Napoleon, and she chooses not to share the rumors about the fate of their men. The eldest woman says that Violette must take care of the man and cook for him. While Violette is preparing the stranger's meal, one of the village children reports that he spoke to the man, whose name is Jean, and he is 39 years old. Violette checks in on Jean, but he is sleeping. She watches while he sleeps for a while, and then notices that he has a gun. The next day, Jean makes himself useful by helping with the harvest. The women are finding it hard to keep their eyes off of him. During a lunch break, Violette is offended by her mother's comments towards Jean, and she leaves the group to sit on her own. Rose accompanies Violette and tells her that she thinks that Jean likes her. Violette says that although Jean is not the young man she had imagined, he is handsome. Violette takes Jean some soup and fruit, and he questions her on her ability to read. Violette tells Jean that her father taught her to read, and that she's the only one in the village who knows how. Jean gifts Violette his book and says that she can keep it as long as he is around. He also tells her that her father's imprisonment is no surprise due to his Republican education. Violette asks him not to tell the others about the prisoners, and he agrees to keep it between them. Violette and Jean walk back from the well together and discuss their favorite authors. When Violette brings up Victor Hugo, Jean remarks that he has not read any of Hugo's work. Violette says that she cannot lend Jean the book as it was her father's prized possession, but she'd be happy to read to him in the evenings. Jean accepts the offer. While Violette is reading to Jean at the dinner table that evening, he seductively touches her hand. Jean stands behind Violette and caresses her neck while she continues to read, before he leans down to kiss her neck. Violette is overcome with arousal and kisses Jean. They kiss passionately before making their way to the bedroom to take matters further. Tensions rise, while at the well the other women challenge Violette on the arrangement they made after the harvest the one day. They want to know when they will get their turn with Jean and accuse Violette of keeping him for herself. Violette has a private moment with Jean by the river and explains the context of the deal she made along with the other women that day during the harvest. Jean is offended by her comments and storms off. Violette later accuses the other women for scaring Jean off. After all, they were the ones who put pressure on Violette to share Jean. Violette snoops through Jean's belongings one evening and finds a letter that we don't get to see. Later that evening, Violette joins Jean in his room, and he tells her that he's given her proposition some thought and that he's willing to sleep with the other village women. It seems like he is testing her. Violette asks if he is running from something, and he accuses her of looking through his belongings. After seemingly flirting with some of the other women during harvest, Jean sneaks up on Violette after she has just had a swim in the river. She welcomes his presence and they kiss passionately. Later that day, Jean is approached by one of the other village women. She sneaks up on him from behind and grabs his butt. Jean instinctively reacts defensively, but the woman pushes for a kiss. Without too much convincing, Jean turns the woman around and makes love to her against a tree. Later that day, Violette approaches Jean to tell him that dinner is ready. She also tells him that she knows about the other woman and that she saw them talking together. Jean does not deny the accusation and says that he'll be seeing her again tonight. That night, Violette has a bad dream of the bird of prey she's seen in the past and runs to Jean's room and he comforts her. Violette stands with Rose at her husband's grave. Rose suggests that it is clear that Violette is falling in love with Jean. Violette says that she still honors their agreement. Rose says that she will be meeting Jean tomorrow evening because it is the right time for her to fall pregnant. Violette says that her feelings for Jean have nothing to do with their agreement. Violette finally asks Jean why he came to their village. Jean explains that he killed a man, but that it was a life or death situation. Jean explains that if he does not leave France, he'll be hanged, and that if it wasn't for Violette, he'd have left already. Violette goes to the healer to confirm her pregnancy. Violette asks if there have been others, and the healer tells Violette that she is the first. The healer also tells Violette not to tell Jean that she is pregnant just yet. That night, after a steamy bath, Violette tells Jean that she is pregnant, despite the warnings of the elder woman. Jean seems delighted by the news and asks Violette if she will run away with him. Months later, as we see a couple women bearing flourishing wombs, the village folk stumble across two men seated in the town square. It is Etienne, one of the woman's husbands, and another man who has escaped persecution. Both of the men had been deported to Algeria, but now they have returned. Etienne shares some heartbreaking news of some of the village men who died in Algeria. One of the older women tells Violette that, with the news of the men returning from their prison camps, Violette must tell Jean to leave the village. Violette will not accept this, especially considering her pregnancy. Violette says that if he goes, she goes. Violette finds a letter from Jean detailing his departure from the village. Jean says that his future is uncertain, but he'll write to her when he can. He hopes that someday they'll meet again. Jean asks Violette to promise that regardless of what happens between them, she'll tell their child that it was born of the love between a free woman and a free man. He ends the letter, "I love you." Signed, Jean. We then see Violette giving birth to their son. And with that, the film ends. If you enjoyed this recap, it would be really helpful if you could like and subscribe. Please check out our other movie recaps and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.